So in addition to what we talked about with the ECB minutes, we also had PMI numbers coming out that were, I think, fair to say, disappointing with respect to Germany in particular. Manufacturing has been weaker, and now services seem to be getting a bit weaker as well. We have the Deutsche Bank meeting that's going on, a specific company, but it's really struggling over there. What is going on with European growth, and particularly Germany, which is the driver?
David, first of all, global growth is down. If you take a look at the recent IMF prediction for this year, it is down. The estimate is down to about 3.2%. So I think we have to look at this as a global story, because with Europe and Germany especially being so dependent on exports, I think we have to look too at softness elsewhere. I think inside Europe, there are a number of factors. There are some long-term factors like really bad demographics over time, some internal struggles they have between the nation states and the European Union on regulation, making it difficult to start up new companies. But I think part of this is sort of Europe's contribution to a slowing global growth story.
At the same time, Bob, as you know, there is a growing chorus, at least in some quarters, saying there needs to be some fiscal stimulus, particularly with respect to Germany. You know Angela Merkel, the chancellor, quite well. Is that in the cards, do you think? Because after all, the ECB has pretty much done what it can do, hasn't it?
I think the ECB, if you listen to what they've said, and including today, believes that the monetary contribution to the European economic story has run a significant part of its course. In Germany, as you well know, going back to their historical concerns coming out of the Weimar period, they tend to be fiscal disciplinarians. A lot of people think that they should loosen up a bit, that is, put some fiscal stimulus into play, not only in Germany, but Europe and globally. I would say it's important to note that Q1 2019 statistics in Germany showed a surprising growth rate of 1.7% annually, with a real pickup in household demand and construction. So I don't know that this is a trend that's going to play out during the course of the year. The predictions are still for growth of only about 0.5%, but at least we're starting to see some pickup in that household demand. I personally wouldn't look for a lot of fiscal stimulus in the near term.
So the question then becomes an external factor, which is China. We spoke to Bob Diamond, formerly Barclays, now with Atlas Merchant, about his views on Germany. Here's what he had to say.
If you think about the potential for a trade war, it's going to really hit those countries that rely on manufacturing and rely on exports. And so it's countries like Germany that I think will be impacted more than the U.S.
So, Ambassador, is there upside surprise here if we do get some kind of trade resolution? Is Germany like off to the races?
I don't know that it'd be off to the races, Alex, but certainly Germany is very dependent on global trade. As I said, I think their slowdown is part of a global slowdown story, and also, you know, a global trade story at this particular point. They are heavily invested in China. By the way, China also heavily invested in Germany and Europe. And so I think a trade deal between the U.S. and China would have that ancillary effect of helping Germany and Europe. Remember, too, we're beginning a trade negotiation ourselves with Europe. This is the most active trade environment that I've ever seen. The U.S. has concluded a deal with Korea, has concluded the new U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement, the negotiations going on with China, with Europe, with Japan. And therefore, from my perspective, a country like Germany, as Bob Diamond said, would have an interest in successful resolution of all of those, including the U.S.-European negotiation.
Bob, one thing I think that markets and companies right now are trying to get a sense of is this trade dispute between the United States and China. How long will it go on? How bad could it get? I think people were sort of expecting it to get resolved, I mean, even as recently as last week or so, and then it seemed to have taken a different direction. Do you think people are being unrealistic in expectations about that G20 meeting where President Xi may or may not be meeting with President Trump? It seems like a lot of people are putting a lot of hopes that they'll get together and resolve this thing.
I don't know, David, that we will see an agreement at the G20 summit in Osaka in a month, but I think we're to the point in this negotiation that the negotiators have done their job, and now the political leaders need to do their job. And I think only Presidents Trump and Xi can give that instruction to bring the deal to closure. I think the negotiators are close enough to do it. So I don't expect the deal to be reached or certainly signed, anything like that, in Osaka. But I think it is an opportunity for the two leaders, factoring in domestic politics in both countries, to make a decision on what instructions to give their negotiators coming out. And I think it is on the table for them to say to the negotiators, let's cut the deal. But let's be clear. We are in a decades-long competition with China, not just on trade, but also political, military, and other issues. We thrive on competition. Let's all play by the rules and continue to compete. So I think this trade deal will be an important next step, but we are looking at decades of competition between our two countries and, by the way, our two systems.
Bob, as we all try to manage this relationship, if we can't just resolve it, manage it, how much more complicated is it once we've inserted national security issues in the telecommunications area with Huawei? Because the United States position is this is not a trade issue at all. It's national security. And once you insert that in, how much more difficult does that make it to get a trade deal?
I think it adds a bit of complexity, but David, as you know, I've served at the State Department, Defense Department, the Treasury Department, and the White House. For me, national security is the summation of our foreign policy plus defense policy, plus international economic policy, all resting on a strong intelligence base. And therefore, economics and finance have always been part of the national security equation. And with a relationship like China, with a 360-degree relationship in which each of those factors, foreign policy, defense, economics, and intelligence, play a role, I don't think you can single out Huawei or anything like that to say it is an outlier. No, it's an integral part of that competition that we discussed. And by the way, one thing is to be noted, and for your viewers especially, there's a lot of talk about the U.S.-China trade dispute and the U.S. and China on Huawei. I'm actually, at this point, more concerned about the rise of investment protectionism than I am trade protectionism. And not just in the U.S., but in Europe, Germany, UK, Canada, Japan, Singapore, and Australia, new investment regulations have been promulgated in the past year, making it more difficult to acquire in those countries. It's aimed at China, but it's going to affect global investors more broadly. And so for the Chinese to say this is simply the U.S. trying to hold them down belies the fact that there is a global concern about China not playing by the rules, using FDI, foreign direct investment, to try to get at advanced technology, intellectual property. And so I think we need to look at this again, not just on a bilateral but global basis.